Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Thursday, the 18th of July, comes to you from London. And we start by looking at the dollar index. It rose quite sharply at the start of the week on renewed hopes that US interest rates wouldn't be cut, which was strong for the dollar. So that has actually just started to wane away, but we are still in positive territory on the dollar. The medium-term daily Ichimoku chart, we're stuck in the middle here, so there's a lot of uncertainty just showing up in the chart. We'll either break to positive or to negative, but of course the long-term trend really does dominate, and that does suggest that the dollar will remain strong. Looking at the euro against the dollar, we see that that's still sinking lower. Bearish long-term, medium-term stuck in the clouds similarly as the dollar index, but short-term we're recovering, but not enough to put us bullish. Against the yen, the dollar is falling, so that does give us a little bit of a heads up. We're making new lows there on the short-term chart. Sterling sitting at 124.56, so it has recovered a little bit against the dollar, but still looking bearish on all three time frames, and we still have this downside target of 119.47, so that's 4% away. Against the euro, sterling also looking weak. The spectre of a no-deal Brexit is weighing heavily still on sterling, and against the Swiss franc, we're bearish on all three time frames as well. You can see here on the weekly chart, we're really back to two-year lows here against the Swiss franc. Bitcoin just struggling to get back above the $10,000 level, so that psychological level is now pretty important for Bitcoin, and it'll be key to see whether we can actually break that. We do have an upside target to 11,700, which is activated, and the downside targets have been met, which is bearish in itself, but no new downside targets at the moment. The US stock market was down fairly significantly yesterday, down 0.65% on the S&P 500 index. The Nasdaq was lower as well, and the Dow was down just under 0.5%. So markets still struggling, having made those new highs, struggling to really run on them. If we look at the Russell 2000 index, we've turned short-term bearish here, so this is not good news for the breadth of the market. And looking at the futures today, we see the S&P futures down 0.25%. That's taken us into bearish territory on the chart. And the Nasdaq E-mini is down 0.4%. Again, that has taken us into bearish territory on the chart as well. So quite significant there that we are turning bearish in terms of the short-term position. So you expect the US markets to open lower today. The UK market is already doing that. It's down 0.4% this morning, and so we are bearish on the short-term. Medium and long-term charts still have work to do. The long-term chart just struggling to break out on that weekly chart. So the UK market still a lot of uncertainty, and of course Brexit isn't helping that process. Mid-caps a long way from turning to long-term bullish, and short-term we are just entering bearish territory there. We'll have a look at the individual stocks in a moment. The DAX in Germany this morning down over 1%, so we've been hit quite hard there, and the CAC 40 in Paris being hit very hard, down 1.3%. Having looked quite good for a break to the upside, it's now just starting to look a little bit like the second top here, a double top, and we are bearish on that short-term chart. Japan is down quite significantly, down 2%, so that's not helped. Stronger yen not helping there either. And the Hang Seng was down 0.2%, and the Chinese market down over 1%. So we are seeing quite significant falls there in Asia. India was relatively strong, only down 0.3%. The medium and long-term chart's still looking pretty good there. And the Aussie market actually bucking the trend up 0.5%. Brent crude oil sitting at 63.64, making new lows. So we're still in bearish territory here. The bullish support really disappearing on this weekly chart, and so we are seeing downside targets, new lows building. The recent turmoil in the Straits of Hormuz starting to become a bit of a distant memory in terms of the oil price, and the same with WTI heading lower there as well, with downside targets some 7% lower. Nat gas sitting at $2.32, so really in the doldrums still. And if we look at gold, it's benefiting slightly from the falls in markets, and it's up this morning another 0.5%, back to $1,420, putting it back into bullish territory on the short-term chart. Silver sitting at $16, so looking quite strong there as well. And US 10-year yields weakening there to 2.05%. So we're seeing a little bit of a sentiment change there over the last day or two as well. And the Bund, we're seeing German bonds looking quite strong. Remembering this is the reverse of the yields, so bond prices rising, yields lowering, negative interest rates still very much on the cards in Europe. This data coming from Thomson Reuters Icon, could be any other data, Bloomberg, any real-time data service you want. For my stock analysis, I just use Yahoo Finance data, freely available. And here we see on the indices, we're just at a glance, we're in bearish territory on most indices, so that's quite negative. Looking at the Dow 30 this morning, you see Boeing actually was the best performer, up 1.87%, really bucking what you'd expect there with the 737 crisis. But Boeing actually still managing just to hold on, and they were the best performer yesterday. Caterpillar were the worst performer, down 2.4%, and so this chart really still struggling, and we see here we're just in that bearish territory for Caterpillar and the relative on a general downtrend against the Dow. Taking a look at the Nasdaq, we had quite interesting movements yesterday. We had Cintas Corporation up 8%, but of course we saw that a lot of the downside was in the index, so we did have some pretty big fallers. CSX down 10.7%. Watch for Netflix today. That will be very interesting. They disappointed the market last night with their subscriber numbers. They were down just 1%, but in after hours trading they fell quite heavily. That's probably going to be enough to take them negative even on the long term chart if they do sustain that fall. So it'll be interesting to see how the chart reacts to that. Taking a look at the Aussie market, we had Western Areas Limited, they're up 5%, Evolution Mining also up 5%, so looking strong there. On the downside, we had CIMIC Group, they were down a massive 19%, really looking quite dire there on the chart. Looking at the Indian market, the best performer was Wipro. They were up 3.5%. Chart looking pretty good, still trending up. Not a massive outperformance on the Dow Jones Index, but an outperformance nonetheless, and looking reasonably good there. And on the downside, we had Yes Bank back in the laggards board. That chart looking really dire, underperforming the Dow this year by 60%. And we see the live updates coming in from Yahoo Finance. Tata Motors Group, they were down 3%. So looking pretty grim there. Taking a look at Europe, we start by looking at the UK top 100. EasyJet reporting results this morning. They surprised the market to the upside. Their guidance in line with expectations. A lot of people were expecting a disappointment. They've actually done relatively well. They're still bearish in the medium and long term. The relative has underperformed, but we are seeing a little kick up there to the upside. And if we look, there's quite a few utilities here, SSE, Centrica, so we're BT Group. We're seeing a lot there. And if we come to the negative stocks, we see NMC Healthcare, they're down 2.8%. Ashtead Group down 2%. Sage, which has been recovering lately, they're down 2%, but the trend is still very nice on that medium-term chart, and we're outperforming the market some 20%. Here we see the live pricing coming in from Yahoo. Taking a look now at the FTSE 250, IO Group up 38%, so massive performance there. Saga have actually been in the leaderboard quite a few times this week, so we're seeing they're starting to put a recovery in, but a lot to do to get out of that bearish mode. And if we take a look at the worst performers, we see here Vivo Energy down nearly 2%. They're really struggling there. Just looking at some of the normal suspects here, we've got Superdry. They're lower, really making new lows, having teetered along the bottom. So really quite key there. We've got Metro Bank as well, down 1.3%, really struggling to recover from the recent downtrend we've seen with all the negative news there. Keep an eye on ASOS today as well. They've had results. In fact, we can probably see in the 250 if the ASOS have actually disappointed the market as well. Taking a look at Europe now, we take a quick look here. Nokia, the best performer this morning. France being quite heavily hit, so we aren't seeing many French stocks in the leaderboard, but we do have Sanofi in Paris. They're up 0.3%, not enough really to click the dial in positive territory for France. And if we look at the negative stocks, we've got SAP Group down a massive 7%. Chart looks great, but they're really falling heavily this morning, and so that is quite key. Airbus down 0.73%. So a lot of European stocks just selling off in the general malaise. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.